One of the biggest assumptions business owners make is this: I will always have time to make a different decision later. I don't believe that's true. And in many cases, it's one of the most expensive assumptions a business owner can make, because the future rarely changes all at once. It changes gradually. Then suddenly, options slowly become limitations, flexibility slowly disappears, opportunities slowly narrow. And by the time people realize what's happening, they're no longer choosing from a position of strength. They are reacting from a position of pressure, which is why I believe one of the greatest advantages a business owner can create today isn't a company, it isn't a trust, it isn't a country, it isn't even wealth, it's optionality. Because in an uncertain world, the future increasingly belongs to the people with options. Hi, I'm Virna White, CEO of WellSafe. Over the last 5 episodes, we've discussed why more business owners are creating exit options, why more business owners are looking beyond Australia, why timing matters, why structure matters, and why capital always finds a better home. Today, I want to bring everything together because none of those conversations are actually about tax. They're not really about residency. They're not really about structures. They're not even really about international planning. They are all pointing towards something much bigger: optionality. And I believe optionality is becoming one of the most valuable assets a business owner can possess. One of the most dangerous assumptions people make is believing the future will look largely the same as the past. For most of history, that was often true. Change was relatively slow, opportunities were relatively stable, geography mattered, systems changed gradually. Today, that's no longer the world we're living in. Technology is changing rapidly, governments are changing rapidly, regulations are changing rapidly, markets are changing rapidly. Entire industries are being transformed, and the speed of change continues to accelerate. In that environment, certainty becomes harder, but flexibility becomes more valuable. And that's exactly why optionality matters. Most people spend their lives trying to predict the future. I think that's the wrong approach. The most successful business owners I know don't try to predict every outcome. They prepare for multiple outcomes. That's a very different mindset because prediction assumes certainty. Preparation assumes uncertainty, and uncertainty is a reality we are all operating within. The business owner who has one option is vulnerable. The business owner who has multiple options is resilient, and resilience is becoming increasingly valuable. Optionality is often misunderstood. People hear the word and think offshore structures, second residencies, international banking, overseas companies. But optionality is much broader than that. Optionality means having choices. Choices about where you live, choices about where you work, choices about where you invest, choices about where you structure your wealth, choices about where you spend time, choices about how your family lives in the future. The key isn't whether you use every option. The key is that the option exists, because an option you never use still has value. The absence of an option often has a cost. This is where many people get caught. They assume flexibility will always be available until one day it isn't. The business becomes too complex. The family situation becomes too complicated. The opportunity passes. The regulations change. The timing disappears. And suddenly the decision that could have been made easily years earlier becomes significantly harder. Not because anybody did anything wrong, but because optionality wasn't created early enough. This is one of the biggest lessons I've learned from working with successful business owners. The people who preserve the most flexibility are rarely the people who react first. They're the people who prepared first. The most sophisticated business owners understand something many people miss. They understand that freedom is not created by wealth alone. It's created by flexibility. I've met wealthy people with very few options, and I've met people with far less wealth who had enormous flexibility. Because flexibility doesn't come from what you own, it comes from how you've positioned yourself. It comes from preparation, it comes from planning, it comes from optionality. And that's why many successful business owners spend so much time creating alternatives long before they need them. Not because they're planning to use every alternative, but because they understand the value of having them. If you've watched this entire series, you may have noticed something. We've talked about the federal budget, Australia, residency, structures, capital, international planning. But the real lesson was never in any of those things. The real lesson is this: the future belongs to people who create options before they need them. That's the common thread running through every episode. Not tax, not politics, not relocation, options. Because options create flexibility. Flexibility creates resilience, and resilience creates opportunity. This is where I think many people approach international planning incorrectly. They ask, should I leave Australia? I don't think that's the first question. The better question is, what options would I like available if circumstances changed? That's a completely different conversation. One is reactive, one is strategic, one assumes certainty, one prepares for uncertainty, and one usually creates better outcomes than the other. If you're a business owner watching this, my message is simple. You don't need to leave Australia. You don't need to move overseas. You don't need an offshore structure. You don't need international banking. You don't need a second residency, at least not necessarily. But you should understand your options, because understanding your options gives you choices, and choices are valuable, particularly in a world that continues changing faster every year. One of the biggest assumptions business owners make is believing they'll always have time. Time to plan, time to prepare, time to create options, time to change direction. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it isn't. And that's why the business owners who tend to preserve the most wealth, flexibility, and freedom are really the ones who wait until pressure exists. They're the ones who prepare while options are still available. Because once pressure arrives, the available choices are often far more limited. And that's why I believe the future belongs to those who preserve their options. Not the biggest, not the fastest, not even the wealthiest. Those who prepared while they still had choices. Because in an uncertain world, the ability to choose may become the most valuable asset of all. I'm Virna White from WellSafe. Thank you for joining me. And remember, the people with the most freedom tomorrow are usually the people who created options today. I'll see you in the next series.